to have travel to China back because today we are especially happy to welcome a long-standing friend of Luohan Academy and supporter today to speak on an issue of paramount importance for the world. Professor Sumit Agarwal is a Lo-Tuk Kwang Distinguished Professor of Finance, Economics, and Real Estate at the National University of Singapore. He also heads the Real Estate Department. But beyond NUS, he is the president of the Asian Bureau of Finance and Economics Research. So we are privileged to have him today with us to present his thoughts on the climate crisis, challenges and opportunities, and particularly using his expertise in studying the household on household sustainability and what the latest research shows about this field. So with that, Professor Agarwal.
Thank you very much for a very generous introduction. So let me ask first, how much time do I have? An hour. Okay, great. So we'll see. I'll present and you guys tell me, okay, what you like, what you don't like. So I'm going to be presenting a lot of research that I have done over the years on various topics. I'll define that. So almost you can think about every 1 or 2 or 3 slides that I'll be presenting is a research paper. And most of the research papers are co-authored with people at NUS and beyond. When I'll go into them and explain what we are doing and why we are doing this and what my thought process is. But the underlying thing you should have when I'm presenting this is a lot of this research is done as if you are doing medical research where you have a treatment effect, a treated group, and a control group. And what I'm going to show you causal evidence or inference from that treatment effect on the treated group. And so it's not just correlations, what you typically see in research, but essentially making the argument that this is really important in terms of thinking about causation. Okay, with that kind of introduction, first I want to say this is a lot of work that is built upon with co-authors, so it's just not my work. I'm just here to present it. Okay. So I've been thinking quite a lot recently on sustainability. And when people think about sustainability, they mostly think about environmental sustainability. And what I want us to think broadly is not just environmental sustainability, but economic sustainability and social sustainability. Okay, so we have to be very inclusive when we think of sustainability. And when people think about sustainability, they mostly think top down. Their view is, how can we get Alibaba to actually adhere to certain sustainability norms, ESG requirements on environmental, social, and economic sustainability or governance sustability. And I want to flip that idea around and say, let's not think about the corporations, but instead, let's think bottom up. Sustainability has to start with the consumer. So this is very important for you guys because you deal with the consumer directly. And you want to think about how to inculcate sustainability ideas into your consumers. So if they reduce their sustainability footprint or carbon footprint, corporations will automatically reduce their sustainability footprint. So to me, it starts with the individual, not just the corporation. I am not saying we don't need to do the top-down approach. We should continue to doing top-down approach, but it's difficult and it's not politically feasible. Let me give you an example. Singapore recently announced that they will actually raise the carbon pricing of per ton of carbon emission by a company from $5 to $90 over the next 10 years. When they announced, they said, okay, our carbon pricing regulation will only be applicable to 17 companies. Now, clearly, there are many, many more companies in Singapore that have huge carbon emission, but what happens is they all get a carve out. They all get some kind of a way to get away from this regulation because either they are economically important, they're politically important, they're important for the national security. Who knows? So what my point is that if we do this, only do this top-down approach, most corporations will find a way out of actually having a sustainability requirement for them. And hence, if we do bottom up, we can't, not every consumer can go tell their politician, oh, by the way, I'm not going to adhere to sustainability norms and carve me out. That just doesn't happen. It doesn't work. So everybody will end up adhering to these norms. Okay. So obviously, over the years, countries have been having this Earth Summit, and they have kind of come down with this agenda of 21 sustainability items. I have broadly taken these 17 goals into these three major buckets: social, environmental, and economic. And so I will focus on all three of them. Okay. The way I want to think about there are economists in the room who are thinking about, oh, what do I think about it? How do I model this? Typically, when we think about our economic model, we have this idea that we want to maximize utility of the individual over their lifetime. So I just want to augment that model to say we want to maximize the utility not over the lifetime, but over multiple lifetimes, but not just of the individual, but of your surroundings itself. So when I say over multiple lifetimes, I've already brought in the environmental part. So economic models will say just maximize utility over your lifetime, that's it. When I bring in the environment, I'm saying, look, it'll be multiple lifetimes because you have to think about multiple generations. If you're a Hindu, you can think about I'll be reborn, so I have to think about multiple lifetimes. So I need to maximize my utility over multiple lifetimes. If you're Buddhist, similarly, you can think. But then I want to bring in the social. So it's not just you want to maximize utility of yourself, but people around you. So you need to think collectively. And so you can think of a model where the utility function will change from purely single lifetime and single person. I am not a theorist, so I'm not going to get into it. Some of you are. You can think about writing a model to kind of make this model more about sustainability. Okay. Now, when I think about environmental sustainability, I think about three main issues in terms of environmental sustainability. I think of utilities, transportation, and food consumption of the individual. If you can account for these three factors of the individual, you have captured around 90% of the individual's sustainability footprint or carbon footprint. They're almost equally divided among these three. Utilities, if you think about it, what kind of transportation you use, do you take public transportation versus do you do ride sharing versus if you own a car? Okay. If I think about food, there's huge variation in terms of your carbon footprint depending on what you eat. For instance, if you actually consume beef, your carbon footprint is around 20 times than the carbon footprint of somebody who actually eats fish or have a purely vegetarian diet. Now, that is something very important because currently we don't price in the carbon footprint of the food we eat. There is no model that we actually do that. Now, these are important issues for you guys because you have massive amount of data about all three, essentially, of the consumer's behavior. Okay. You can then essentially think about, oh, I can understand the carbon footprint of the individual. Similarly, utilities, how much water and electricity or even heat consumers are consuming on a regular basis, we can then figure out what is their carbon footprint. So, I mean, let me give you a simple example. Singapore is an economy which is very small. It is pretty much a flat country. There are no mountains and there are no speedways. You can't drive a car more than 100 kilometers an hour. But if you actually have been to Singapore or go to Singapore, Singapore has huge amounts of racing cars like Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and they have a lot of SUVs. Now, I have no idea why in Singapore you need fast cars or you need a SUV. I mean, there is no mountain you will climb with the SUV. Clearly, the pricing of those cars is way too low. Even though Singapore prices cars very high, but the carbon pricing of those cars is not there. If they increase the pricing by 10 or 15 times, people will not buy these cars. People will buy more practical cars. either hybrids or electric cars. And that's how we can reduce their carbon footprint. And they have very good public transportation system or ride sharing system. Why aren't people not doing that? So that's my thought on this. Financial sustainability, I've been working on financial sustainability or household finance for over 20 years. And I'll talk a little at some examples of financial sustainability of how consumers are making routine mistakes. I mean, this is something who are working for and financial here can actually look into the data and see what kind of mistakes are people making in your portfolio and how we can help them and make them make better financial decisions. So I'll talk about some examples of financial sustainability. I think what is typically left out in the conversation on sustainability is on social sustainability. I mean, large corporations pay attention to the gender gap in their employees. They think about women's education, minimum wages, and other things. But vastly, we don't have this discussion around corporations. What is the role of gender gaps or wage gaps? And these are big social sustainability topics. What is the role? What is the effect of aging population, retirement safety, intergenerational income inequality, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this topic as well, that social sustainability is important. And again, Alibaba can play a big role on this topic, both internally, but also more at the country level or a macro level, how social sustainability can be incorporated into your practices or into the consumers that you deal with. So I can think of examples. When I go get to it, I'll bring them up. Okay. More importantly, you can think about examples of integrating these three ideas: social, environmental, and financial sustainability, and think about what are the questions that revolve around these topics. Okay, I mean, how can we bring in environmental policy changes and its effect on housing demand or house prices? So you think about environmental sustainability and actually talking about financial sustainability at the same time. Okay. So let me spend a few minutes on this slide because this is directly related to something that you guys here can do. Okay. When I think about this household sustainability, there are two problems. First is how to measure and what data. So we need data and measurement. Luckily, you guys have both. I mean, you have talent here who can do the work to measure this, but you also have enormous amount of data. So let's think about building a sustainability scorecard for individuals. Currently, we have a financial scorecard for every individual around the world, a FICO score. We know how good you are financially. What I'm proposing is let's build a sustainability or carbon scorecard for every individual. Now, how do we go about doing that? We can collect financial records of individuals from their financial transactions. As I mentioned, there are three big areas where they actually have a carbon footprint: food, transportation, and utilities. A lot of that data resides here or resides at banks. You can actually start looking at transactions of individuals. See, do they take a car? Do they put in petrol in their car? Do they do ride sharing? Do they take public transportation? Based on the transactions that they're making on their financial records, on their e-wallet. That allows you to capture that information. The second thing is you actually know if they are, where they are eating, what they are ordering. That data also is with you guys. You have a wealth of data on your consumers' eating habits. Not just do they go to a given location, but you know exactly the order they make. If their food is being delivered, do you know that they order beef versus chicken versus pork, and did they order Coke or other drinks? That allows you to kind of create various measures on the food side on their sustainability score. Very important. Finally, on transportation, you can do the same thing. And utilities. Utility, I don't know how easy it is based on your data, how much you can capture. If they're using e-wallets to pay for their utility bills, you know exactly how much the bills are, and you can come up with their footprint. So if you combine all these three things, you can essentially, for your entire consumer base, you can create a sustainability scorecard or a carbon scorecard. It will be very useful. I mean, consumers love the idea of having a financial scorecard of themselves. They love their FICO score. People like to say, look, my FICO score is X. Now, if you say, look, as a company, we will create a carbon scorecard for every individual, consumers will like this. Now, why should you make it? I've talked about data first. Now let me tell you, why is this good? Or why is this important? Why will consumers like it? Why will you guys like it to do something like this? So I want to give multiple benefits first to the consumers to like it. So many consumers, you can think about working with the government in China and saying, look, our goal as a country is to reduce carbon footprint over national carbon footprint. We will create a scorecard, and if you use this scorecard to give tax breaks to the consumers, so the tax authority in China can say, okay, people who have a lower scorecard, we will give them a tax break. So they will get a lower taxes based on their carbon scorecard. So consumers will immediately see the financial benefit of a carbon scorecard. I can also bring in financing. You can say, look, if you get green financing through your platform, we will reduce the financing cost if your score is low. If you have a lower scorecard, we will reduce the price we charge you at Ant Financial, because that's beneficial to you and it's beneficial to us. So you can see why the consumer then will say, oh, I actually want a green scorecard for myself. The other benefits I see this currently, what is happening is there's lots of cross subsidization that is happening because people don't know their scorecards. As I mentioned, people are driving large cars, or people are perpetual eaters of, say, beef, but there are lots of people, young people, who actually tend to be vegetarian or have a very low their carbon footprint based on their diet. Why should the young people be cross subsidizing the rich people because they only eat beef? And you can say, look, we will allow you to have a differential scorecard, and the young people can have a lower tax base or lower interest that they charge. So that cross subsidization will stop or kind of be mitigated. Now, this cross subsidization is happening both at the country level and within country at society level. Richer countries tend to eat more expensive food, drive more expensive cars, have bigger utility bills than the less developed countries. So why should less developed countries be cross subsidizing the rich countries? Because their carbon footprint is low. So having a carbon footprint will help not only countries, but individuals within countries to have a differential footprint or pricing. So you can see there are multiple benefits of having a carbon scorecard for individuals. Now, you are the right place to actually start this exercise. You have the data, you have the reason to create it, and you can market this as a new product that you're creating for your consumer base and even your SMEs. I also want to build a carbon scorecard for SMEs. So you have a big SME base within Alibaba. You can say, look, based on your delivery, packaging, everything, and how much you're doing reusing the packaging, how much are you selling, like what is it called, the fish, idle fish, how much are you doing on reselling those things? We can reduce your create a carbon scorecard, and you get a lower score on those things. So think about within Alibaba, you can create an individual scorecard, and you can create a SME scorecard that will benefit all of them, and you'll be in the forefront of this idea of creating a sustainable scorecard, not just at the corporate level, which we hardly believe. I mean, I hardly believe the ESG scorecards that exist for corporations. There's a lot of greenwashing, a lot of these scorecards are developed by companies that actually have a stake in these companies that they're dealing with or creating the scorecard for. So we don't know how good those scorecards of measurement are. At my institute, we are dealing quite a lot in solving these problems. So we are doing a few things. We are trying to take the ESG scorecard for the corporations, fix it, but also trying to push idea of building SME scorecard and individual level scorecard for their carbon footprint. But I mean, you are a bigger organization, you have the better data here and time series data. You can do it much more quickly to build this scorecard at a bigger country. I'm trying to start with doing this for Singapore at a very small footprint, but you can say, okay, we can build it for one of the largest population in the world is such a scorecard. Okay, I'll skip the social scorecard. I can talk about it later if needed. Okay, so this is the broad idea of what I want to think about in terms of household sustainability. If we can create this score, we can actually benefit society. Now let me spend some time talking about few projects that I have been doing in this space. Okay, not necessarily building the scorecard, which we are doing, but actually how can we reduce consumers' footprint on all these areas: food, utilities, transportation. Okay, let me skip these and get into directly on the sustainability part. If you think about the big topic when I think about sustainability is utilities. How do people use utilities, and how can we change their incentive to reduce their utility bill? So I don't know in China or what is how much water you guys consume per year, but I can tell you for Europe and for Singapore, average Singaporean consumes around 165 liters of water per day. Okay, that's too much. When they shower, cooking, and laundry and everything, they're consuming around 165 liters of water per day. The goal should be that how can we bring that down to 130 liters of water per day per person, okay, to make the utility bill more sustainable for the planet. Now, how do we do that? As economists, the first thing is let's raise prices. Let's do nudging. Let's do behavioral interventions. Let's do other things, change the plumbing and so forth. Now, most economists will say, oh, no, when you do these things, there's rebound effects, people don't respond, and many things. So the question is, can we actually see this in the data? What do you see this in the data in terms of people's change in behavior? Here is one study we looked at in terms of actually reducing your electricity usage. So what we did is we looked in schools in Singapore, and we randomly picked a bunch of schools. We call them as treated schools, where we went in the schools and said to the principal that, look, if you can collect the bill, the electricity bill from the kids in your school, and if these kids can show that they can convince their parents to reduce the electricity bill by 10%, then you can give them an iPad. Not everybody gets an iPad. They'll be in a lottery to win an iPad. So think about the thought experiment. 100 kids from that school reduce their bill by 10%. They all get into this lottery. One kid wins an iPad. Okay. Now, reducing bill of electricity by 10% is huge, very demanding. But I have a small boy. He tells me many things. I just do it because I listen to him. Most parents listen to their children quite a lot. So my view was that, can we look in the data and see, do parents actually reduce the electricity bill not by 10%, but 2 or 3 or 4%, because then they don't even qualify to get the iPad. But do they work in that direction? But they fall way short, and what I'm getting is everything for free as a policymaker, because they will never even get an iPad, but we reduce the electricity bill. Here is what we find in the data, that this is the treated group, the red line, and blue is the control group, that after we actually do this experiment, in the 4 months where they're supposed to bring in their electricity bill, their electricity usage goes down by around 3%. Now people will say, once you remove this treatment, which is at 0.8, it'll just go back. And what we find is it continues to stay down among the buildings that are near the treated school, that their electricity bills remains low. Now I can operationalize this for you guys. I mean, you can do something, you can give incentives to your customers through various mechanisms by saying, look, if you do reduce your electricity bill, we monitor it, we have the data, or transportation bill, we look at it, and we will give you some credit. either we'll plant a tree for you, or we can give you financial credit, and we will monitor it in our data. So this is not just like you need government intervention or you need academics. You can do it here because you have all the data and you have all the mechanisms to tell the consumer, if you do X, we will actually give you financial or social benefits for doing that. Okay. How about water? Let me skip this one. So I talked about water usage within Singapore. It's around 430 million gallons per day. Okay. So we can solve the water problem around the world through the supply side by actually having more catchment areas, import water, new water, desalination. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to go into supply side solutions, but I'll talk about some demand side solutions. Okay, first, here is the data. Singapore wants to go from 165 liters to 130 liters in 10 years. So the question is, can we do that? How can we do that? And this should be an issue for every country around the world. Water consumption is way too high for countries, and how do we reduce it? So we were studying this one experiment in Singapore where actually what happened is they increased the water pricing by around 30% or 40% depending on how much water you use. So the question we wanted to ask is, if water pricing goes up, do you reduce water consumption? Okay. Now, as economists, you'll say, yes, obviously. You increase the price, people will respond. We don't know the elasticity, how strong this elasticity will be, but rich people's elasticity will be very low. So we wanted to see what the data tells us in this setting. Okay. So what we did is, first we collected the data on water usage for every Singaporean. So this is not a sample. This is not 100 families. This is every Singaporean house in Singapore. We collected their water bill for 10 years, monthly water bill for 10 years. So I have that data. Here is just the raw data plotting over the 10 years. What is their water bill in these 10 years? So what I then wanted to do is run some simple regressions or to show that if I bring in this pricing policy, what will happen to water usage? Just announcing the policy that will increase the price of the water, people reduce their water consumption by 6%. Okay. We also find that if we break this down by price increase, not just announcement, when you increase the price, people reduce their water consumption by 2.5%, but there is still an announcement effect of 3.5%. So a lot of people reduce their water consumption as soon as they get this announcement, the price of water will go up. People just cut down their water usage. Now you may ask why. I mean, the water price didn't go up. It will be in a few months. Why am I reducing my water consumption when I just was told about it? So you can think of models. Okay, you can think about rational inattention models that will suggest that, look, I don't have the time to pay attention to this every month. When will price go up? But this was a salient event of the announcement. Let me just take care of it right now, and I'll persistently make sure my water consumption is low, even though the actual price change will come later. So you can think about models, economic models that can explain these effects. So most economists will say there will be a price effect when price changes. Here I'm actually documenting an additional effect, which is because of rational inattention. Now that's something you can't pick up unless you look at the data and look at the announcement effects and implementation effects separately. Okay. There was another thing we were doing in Singapore, again on water, trying to understand how can we actually reduce water if we actually make the water piping more efficient. So every country, every now and then, in the buildings, will increase the efficiency of the water delivery. And in Singapore, they did that. So we used this home improvement program in Singapore and said, look, once this program comes in, what happens to water usage after the implementation of the program? Now, so essentially what I'm arguing is, if you guys have heard Trump say this, oh, they have reduced my water pressure, and now I can't wash my hair, so I take longer showers. So this is the rebound effect. that you reduce the water pressure, people will just use more water because they want to stand under the shower longer time period. So we wanted to see if that's the case. Here is the result. Again, we looked at it in a very different setting where we have these treated buildings that change the piping of their building and other buildings that didn't. Now this is very clean because the way the treatment happens in Singapore is they do a lottery, sorry, not a lottery, a voting system. If more than 80% of households in the building say we want our pipes changed, it gets changed. If 79% say no, we don't want, then it doesn't get changed. So essentially you can use that variation around that cutoff to see what is happening to water usage among those two buildings. And what you find is water consumption goes down by around 3%, and it is persistent for next 10 years. For next 10 years, the water usage of these buildings remains low because of this plumbing. You might say this is some rebound effect, but it doesn't go up. It is not increasing. It's decreasing at a smaller rate, but it's still the water usage is decreasing in Singapore. Now, what I've shown you combined, if I take the effect of price increase and the plumbing increase, there is a combined effect of 10% reduction in water. So remember, we are at 165 liters. I want to reduce that to 130 liters. Just these two thoughts can reduce the water usage by close to around 15 liters. So that's already big reduction in water in one setting. So I want to keep coming back to what is the practical implications for you guys. You can think of such experiments here that you can do with the customers. You have their data. You can think about how can I nudge them? How can I give them incentives, financial or otherwise, to reduce their utility consumption and track it and then show at the macro level to the government or to the consumer that we deal with that, look, our incentives are helping you reduce your carbon footprint, either utilities or food or transportation. Okay. This is on haze. I'll skip it. I'll talk about something else. Okay, let me talk about sea level rise, because sea level rise is again a big issue. And this is an important issue even for China. I mean, there are lots of provinces and cities and areas that are essentially adjacent, and the sea level rise will actually cause these cities to actually go under. Now, if you think of large cities like Jakarta, it is facing a sea level rise problem for two reasons. One, the water table is sinking. When the water table is sinking, the land sinks a little bit. And two, because of the environmental degradation or rise in temperature, we are seeing ice cubes melting and sea levels rising. So we are having the ground sinking and sea level rising, causing massive issues of sea level rise problems in many countries. You can just look at the map around the world, including China, India, Asia, broader Asia, Indonesia, and Africa. They all will face significant problems. So the question is, can we do anything about it? Now, in Singapore, what happened is the government announced that they will spend $100 billion to combat sea level rise. $100 billion over the 100 years to combat sea level rise. And we wanted to study what is the effect of this on house prices, on houses. Do consumers, so I'm trying to look at environmental issues and its effect on financial outcomes. So here is what happens when you announce that sea level rise will go up. Prices will go down by around 6%. That's expected. When you think about sea level rise, what will happen to prices? But what is more interesting is, if you look at areas in Singapore where the government said, we will mitigate the sea level rise, okay? We will build the wall, or we will build catchment areas for water. Then the house price drop doesn't go down by 6%, it is only 2%. So it's 1/3 of the house price drop that you would get otherwise if you don't do anything as a government. So there are lots of things that can be done to thinking about combating climate change at the environmental level. Okay, I'll skip these. Food is a big issue. This is important for you guys because you can see if you look at this chart, this is not my study. These are studies done in the US and published in top journals, that look, eating your diet, how much it has an impact on the climate footprint of the individual. And eating vegetarian diet has a huge effect. Okay, people have then started looking at what is the effect of eating meat, what is how much of the carbon footprint that you create when you're actually eating, especially meat that use ruminant animals. So ruminant animals are cows, sheep, uh, goats, because they typically have 4 stomachs, and it takes them much longer to digest the food, unlike pigs or chicken or fish. And because of that, they belch out a lot methane, and methane is a 20 times more potent greenhouse gas than is carbon dioxide. Yeah. So that's an important area of research, I think, to look at what can be done. Okay. Let me skip. Oh, so this is something we are doing in Singapore, again, looking at how we can change people's diet. What we did is we partnered up with a platform company in India, in Singapore, that delivers food. So they know everything in your order, exactly like you guys know exactly the order, and you know the carbon footprint due to food of your consumers. So you can use that for creating a scorecard, but you can also nudge your consumers to say, okay, we will give you incentives if you change your order differently. You can partner up with the food provider or restaurants and say, look, we want to actually change habits of our consumers, and we will actually give them financial incentive or social or environmental incentive if they change their food order, either because of health reasons, they should not get aerated drinks, or they should actually reduce their carbon footprint. And we actually actively will work with the merchants and the consumers. And we wanted to look at the same question: what is happening to high calorie or high fat content food in Singapore, and how they reduce it during COVID. Okay. Let me show you another one. This is something we did in Kerala in India, where Kerala actually introduced a fat tax. So they said, if you actually buy food from merchants, or food that is high in oil, or food that is coming from KFC or Burger King or Pizza Hut, those kind of outlets, we will introduce a fat tax of 14%. We'll increase the price of that food by 14%. And we wanted to see, using the data, credit card, debit card transaction data of the consumers, how do consumers change their eating habits because of this tax. So again, this is similar data that you guys have internally. So we use similar data in India, and we look at what is the effect of this fat tax on reducing content that is actually having more from stores, either stores or from a grocery store, content that has high fat in it. And again, we see big effects, 3 to 4% effect per month reduction in their fat content in their purchase behavior. So something like this, easily implementable at Alibaba. Okay. So far, I've talked about environmental. I have like 20 minutes. Okay. So let me try to speed up and talk a little bit about social and then financial. I'll not talk about many things, but I'll talk about just very few ideas. Okay. I'll skip the minimum wage changes and hotel industry, but this is something also you guys can do here. Let me talk about something that I really like. Okay. One of the big social issues I feel around the world is the lack of education by girls. Girls have been falling behind in terms of their education all over the world, and typically the response is culture. Middle East, Asia, or they don't want their girls to study, they want them to be married. When you guys have this problem, I forgot the terminology. You say if the girl is 30 and too educated, then she is not going to get married. What's the terminology? Yes, leftover women. So they have this kind of terminology in China, that you create leftover women. So as a result, rural parents might say, I don't want to educate my girl too much, because otherwise she'll become a leftover woman. question really is, why do girls don't get educated? I can tell you two answers. The biggest concern reason is toilets and sanitary pads. Girls do not get privacy with for toilet. They need privacy, and they need privacy for sanitary pads. Now, economically, girls may not be able to buy sanitary pads in rural areas, and so on and so forth. And so this is the problem in the education level. Now, imagine a girl who is going to 7th grade. She starts her period. She doesn't have sanitary pads. She falls behind by 4 days per month because she doesn't go to school. She's embarrassed. The boys will tease her. That happens month after month after month. After a year, her education is falling behind. She's not passing. The parents are saying, why am I wasting money on the girl? The boy is so smart and she's not smart. She's not smart because she's not going to school for 4 days because of sanitary pads, not because she's not studying hard. Now, as a result, the parents just pull them out from school and the girls get left behind. Now, you might say, okay, Sumit, what you're telling me is a problem in rural China, but that's not a big issue. Or you're talking about Africa or India. Why should we care? California passed a law recently that says every girl in California will be provided free sanitary pads. England passed a law that says the same thing. We'll provide free sanitary pads to all girls in the UK. Many countries, I'm working with Singapore government right now to say this, that will be the case. Singapore, I was just in Luxembourg. They're doing the same thing. They're saying, look, every girl who goes to college will be provided free sanitary pads. So while this, you may say, this is interesting, tell me what is the implication. So what we did is we studied a program in India where the government in Kerala installed sanitary pad vending machines in around 700 schools. It was almost randomly allocated in these schools, and we'll see when you get a sanitary pad vending machine in the school, what happens to girls' educational outcomes. Okay. This is how they were introduced. In 2015, 50 schools got the machine, 100 schools, 200 schools, and so on and so forth. And we wanted to study among these schools that get vending machines, what is happening to girls' educational outcomes. This just says it was randomly allocated. There's no predetermination of this allocation of sanitary pad machine. So we collected the data from India of all school outcomes in terms of their grades. Are they attending school? Are they dropping out? Are they passing exams? And so on and so forth for every school in India. And we started looking at what is happening to girls' educational outcomes in school. Here is the result. In 7th grade, when we introduced the vending machines in the schools that we have a vending machine, the dropout rate for girls goes down by 24%. Okay, girls against boys goes down. 6th grade, there is no effect. 5th grade, no effect. 8th grade, there is still an effect. There is a persistent effect of reduction in the dropout rate of girls in these schools. Okay, so you can see. Now, why is this important for you? I mean, you guys actually are in the business of providing products to consumers. Can you think about saying, okay, we will actually, as a social impact of Alibaba, we will subsidize sanitary pad products to girls in rural areas. We will take this as a social responsibility of our company because we care about girls around China. And even if the merchant charges more, we will give a subsidy. Now, you'll get a lot of credit for that. For a big company to be thinking about this issue and pushing this issue, many companies may join. Even if they don't, at least you're the first to actually think of an idea of providing social equality for girls in China. And this is the research that kind of shows that this matters. If I look at the grades, girls are more likely to appear in exams, more likely to pass the exams, and more likely to pass exams with distinction if they have sanitary pad vending machine in their school. Okay, so you can clearly see there's evidence that girls not only less likely to drop out, but they do better in schools after the introduction of these sanitary pad vending machines. Okay. If I looked at 4th grade, there is no effect because at the 4th grade, they don't have their period. They're not demanding a pad, and so there's no effect on dropout rates or on grades. Okay, By the way, you guys can ask me questions at any time. This is something we have been looking at in China, because there is a big movement essentially to provide food from the farm to the table. Something you guys are doing quite a lot here at Alibaba, and how to actually bridge that gap. The farmer is selling their product directly to their customer. There are the QR code that tracks all of this food, how it is being transported. So we wanted to study if companies that are not doing such behavior, do they get penalized, and do consumers actually punish these companies who behave badly in terms of their social responsibility. So in China, you guys know, there have been these penalty introduction for issues at a company. Were in around 2015. So this is using data from a credit card company in China, and we wanted to see introduction of these penalties in China. What does this do to consumers' purchase behavior of goods and services from that company relative to other companies in that industry? And here is what you see. Consumers punish these companies by reducing their annually monthly spending on that company from around $240 to around $140. Consumers pay attention to these issues. The point is that consumers are very sensitive to how well is their company doing from which they buy products. A company that is not punished, you can see there is no variation on your overall purchase from that company. Okay, you can run regressions and show the same thing. There's essentially a 40% reduction of your purchase from companies that actually behave badly. Now, this is again something you guys can track internally in your data. How are companies doing? Small businesses, how are they violating social norms, economic norms, environmental norms that you adhere to, and what is the implication on the consumer's behavior of them? And you can guide these companies that, look, you need to be more responsible. Otherwise, you are losing business because of your behavior, and our data tells us that. Okay. This is something we were looking at again on the social issue on the two-child policy in China. Does the two-child policy actually have a negative effect on girls in China in terms of wages and employability? Theory would suggest that two-child policy will actually have an impact on the firm's hiring behavior, because they will then say a girl is more likely to have two children, which means she will be out of work for a longer time period. And so we don't want to hire her. We want to hire men because they are more likely to stay. And so we looked at the data from Beijing and other areas to see how does this two-child policy actually affect wages in China of women versus men. And you can clearly see that average wage of the women is going down by 2% persistently. And if I break this down from the age groups, it is going down in the right age group much more than much older women who will not be bearing the second child. Okay. I can look at fresh graduates versus job switchers. I can look at large firms versus small firms. I can look at public sector SOEs and POEs and joint ventures, which have the biggest impact in their behavior in reducing wages. Okay. So gender issues are very important. And my point here is that we have to be, as society, as a company, you can incorporate a lot of these things in your thinking. Okay. I'll skip these. I have what, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Okay. Let me talk quickly on financial sustainability, because this is something you also care about here at Ant Financial, and thinking about how to make sure your consumers are better off and how you can make your consumers better off in terms of financial sustainability. Here is an example. Companies routinely advertise their products. Here's a company in America that advertises they offer 3,000 different kinds of credit cards. Now, if you advertise your 3,000 cards, how a consumer is going to choose the right credit card for them? Very difficult. Okay. What I want to show you is that consumers don't make right decisions most of the time. Here is a simple exercise we did. We offered consumers a credit card with 12% interest rate with $20 annual fee and 15% interest rate with no fee. Now, it's a very simple exercise. You should know if you're going to borrow or not borrow, you should choose the right credit card for you. What you see is 40% of the consumers get it wrong. They choose the wrong credit card. People who don't intend to borrow, okay, so they should only choose a 15% interest rate card with no annual fee, but they choose the 12% interest card with fee, and vice versa. So 40% of consumers make financial mistakes routinely. I've documented this over at least 10 different studies that I've done over the years, that 40% of consumers make financial mistakes. Strictly speaking, the economic models will suggest that we all are rational. We are forward looking, we can actually make decisions to the end of our time or end of our death, and we can optimize. But we can't even optimize on a very simple thing, which credit card to pick. Okay. We actually gave them the option that you can switch if you make a mistake on your credit card. Only 3.8% of credit card consumers switch, whereas 40% make a mistake. So we are very bad at decision making financially. The good news is that when we make mistakes, over time, we reduce the cost of our mistakes to ourselves. When you start a relationship with a financial institution as a consumer, you actually pay the institution $150 in fees. But over 5 years, that fee goes down to around $50. So consumers learn with time and they make less and less financial mistakes. Question is, who makes more financial mistakes? The young and the old tend to make most financial mistakes. You can think of various models. The model I have in mind is that our cognition is declining after age 20. So some of you are quite young, so you have much higher cognitive abilities than I am. I am 53, so I'm like somewhere here. So I am like below zero. So, but the fact is, cognition is declining linearly from age 20. Okay. The good news is that your experiential capital, the more you live, the more experience you have with dealing with financial situations and people, it goes up with time. So these two will interact at some point, and that's where you will make the optimal financial decisions. So we want to argue that consumers who are around 50 make the optimal financial decision because of the declining cognitive abilities, but rising experiential abilities. So all of you in this room have a lot of time. Don't worry, you will be making the best financial decision in your future. Okay. Actually, I'm happy to stop here. I have many other research findings, but I'd rather just listen to you guys or take questions on these topics. Financial, I can talk a lot. I mean, this is something I worked for 20 years, but I wanted to mostly talk about environmental and social issues. Yes.
I'm really impressed by the efforts you have done to do this and show the causality, to be specific, because you can convince others. And these are, for me, the real influence and the contributions to the work. But I'm interested. I'm particularly interested in your idea about the individual scorecard, and I believe that's one of the main reasons you came here. And actually, as you might have known, we have been trying to establish a carbon account, carbon points in Alibaba. But I actually have a fundamental concern, both based on my observations and on my logical reasoning. Let me illustrate a bit. Yeah, so you compare the, you kind of take the FICO as a kind of analogy of the individual card. But the thing is, think about the FICO, the benefits. The thing is, creates incentives for both sides, the firms, the institutions, and the individuals. But the thing is, first, the benefits are created on spot. That means once I evaluate the individual's credit risk, it creates value for the firm to decrease their risk, and at the same time provide the credit to the individuals. And second, there's no need to have any kind of funding because the value comes in the scene. So, but that's not the same for sustainability scorecard, because there's a classical public goods issue and impatience issue. So the thing is, somebody has to fund it. Somebody like some social planner needs to make some kind of intergenerational transfer of benefits. So that's not so it cannot be solved by say that's a I believe that's the big issue of bottom up approach, as you might have heard. Yeah.
Let's say Alibaba could be the first to make a carbon scorecard for China. The incentive right now for you may not be talking to the government and giving tax benefits to that, because the government may not agree. But you can give green credit to that. That's within your hands. You don't need to worry about the government. You can tell the consumer, look, we are doing a public good for you. We are providing a public good. But your benefit to you is you are actually using it to monitor your consumers much more, to figure out how are the consumers actually doing in their eating and how they change, respond to the scorecard. Imagine you build a scorecard and the consumers start responding to that scorecard by reducing footprint. Then you can go to the merchants and say, look, you need to transition. You were making mostly beef products, but our consumer base is transitioning to a lower scorecard in their eating. Maybe you need to think about other products that you have on your menu at a restaurant or at the producer, or you need to have green labeling on your food. And that's how you will actually attract more consumers. So you can, from a business point of view, you can benefit from it, not just society point of view.
This is an internal discussion. Let me let me be. I don't know if it's appropriate, but the thing is, when we try to incentivize the consumers, what we provide them, it's not like these. I mean, people are ideal, they are healthy, they are environmental protectionists. In fact, we provide discounts, we provide coupons, we provide real economic benefits to them so that we can kind of nudge them. But these lodges are, I mean, have real costs. Another point. So as you show in your many experiments, the treatment effects is significant. But these, I kind of, my concern is that maybe this can only happen in a lab, in the sense that because somebody can fund the experiment, but cannot fund the overall adoption. That's really is one of my concerns.
I agree with the RCT nature of the question. That look, sometimes if you do a simple RCT, it only works in the lab. It doesn't work in real life. That's why I started out with two big examples of looking at the entire Singapore and what will happen if I do the change in pricing. So that's not a lab. Now, if you say, okay, Singapore itself is a lab, then it's a different question.
No, sorry. Actually, I'm with you. I'm not trying to say it's not feasible, or I'm trying to think out what's the main problem and how can we solve it. So my analogy of lab means I can only say do the treatment, do the incentive in a small scale. I cannot do that. I mean, where's the funding to change all things?
So right? You're more worried about the funding of it.
Yeah.
Look, but I want to. The main reason I'm here is to tell you guys that you guys are a big company. You can shape the world. You can shape China. Not just you can do it for the good for society. You can do it to make money. A environmental scorecard. Just when we started with the FICO scorecard 50 years ago, most banks said, we will never adopt it. This is garbage. It took them 20 years to iron out. And now Fair Isaac charges $10 for every pull. You can imagine you building a carbon scorecard, you can sell it to doctors. Medical professions will be very interested to know what is the carbon footprint, because then they can know your health footprint. Okay. There could be many companies that will know hiring practices. A lot of companies might say we want lower carbon footprint of our employees. So they may buy that carbon scorecard from you when they're hiring an employee. They say we need a carbon scorecard because we know if you have a very high carbon scorecard, one, you are health risk to us, and two, we don't want employees who have very high carbon scorecards. You could be selling this product. I can think of many ways you can sell this product to your to the companies and even to the consumers to make money out of it. So I don't think this should be purely a social venture. You should do it because it's profitable to you.
Hi, I'm Sang-woo from the Academy. Yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation. So actually, I'm really agree with you what you just said, that I also believe that to solve some of the environmental problem, it shouldn't just be the government. In the end, it's gotta be, we have to incentivize firm to make money out of it. Yeah. So, and also from our last, our annual conference, Dr. Peter Evanson from the McFadden, he also what proposed was, he wanted to implement those, especially B2B and B2C, the circular economy. And he believes that it actually has a lot of chance because there are a lot of the money on the table. People can make money out of it. I'm all for it, but my question is, if there's so many money out of it, why do you think companies are not doing it right now?
Data.
Data? But they have data right now.
Tell me which other company has the data that you guys have.
For example, in the US, Amazon may have the data.
Yeah. So first is the idea. So this is my idea. I have no idea. I don't know of anybody who has thought through this much. In China, they talked about the social scorecard, but not necessarily a carbon scorecard. And partly is the companies are not imagining outside the box to think about this, to use all the data in terms of not just about food, but transportation and utilities, and combining all of this and your travel. If you are buying a plane ticket, what's the carbon footprint of that? When you're buying big durable items, you can discount the carbon footprint of that over 10, 20 years, but you can calculate all of that. But using the data to do that, I'm working with a Japanese company right now in Singapore that is trying to understand the carbon footprint of all proteins to actually do a measurement. So what we are saying, where does the beef get produced? How is it transported? What feed they eat? Based on all of this, we will give you a carbon rating for the beef, for that particular package of beef. And we want to do that for every producer in the world. Now, you guys can do something similar because you have very good data internally. I think the initiative has not been there. The part of it is the business people say, who will do it? Then when academics say we have no data. So you guys actually have it, academics in the business setting here. So you can do both.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've been also thinking about some of the people are saying, yeah, that should be the way we have to go because there's some money in there. It's also good for environment, good society. But yeah, so you're saying that business innovation is the main reason we are not doing it. Lack of business innovation.
I mean, businesses don't innovate till they realize they need to innovate. There is money in it, or the competition will take away something. Then they say, let me innovate. Otherwise, look, Microsoft stopped innovating a long time ago because there's no threat to their products. Okay, the reason they innovate is because they realize somebody else will eat my market share. Here, there is no market to be eaten, so they're like, why should I do anything?
And why don't we try targeting maybe another 10 minutes to 12:45? Obviously, if the discussion is really good, we can be flexible.
Yeah. So actually, I think so. The environmental scorecard is a very interesting idea, and I like it. And I think so. First, to highlight the feasibility of introducing this environmental scorecard. because of data, because of technology, especially for big companies like Alibaba. And second, actually, I think you show many empirical facts. Okay, so consumers do care about these. Okay, that's very good. So now let's think about a theoretical framework. Okay, so what's the impact of introducing a environmental scorecard? So my point is that actually we human beings have already been using kind of a scorecard for thousands of years. So that is money. So money right now, so that is the scorecard that converts all your activities to some number, right? So you work here for a month, you receive salary, so that increases your bank account by some amount. So that is the scorecard. So that converts your activities. And now you introduce a environmental scorecard. Okay, so suppose let's just consider like the consumption of food. Okay, so for different type of foods, you have a different score. Okay, so then that is just the secondary money, right? The second kind of money. So now you introduce another money. Okay, so now you can think of like two cases. One is that consumers can, there's no friction for them to exchange. Okay, so in the sense that, okay, so you are vegetarian, okay, so I really like beef, so my environmental score is very low, and your environmental score is very high, and then maybe I will, to get rid of the disadvantage status, okay, so I will ask you to buy something for me, and then we can exchange. So essentially, we are doing the exchange, right? So then in this two money system, okay, so basically, if there's no frictions, okay, so let's just consider some benchmark. In the benchmark without frictions of exchange, so essentially it is equivalent to imposing some taxes or subsidies on different types of food. Okay, so then if this is true, okay, so then the functioning of introducing the environmental scorecard really depends on the friction between the two the exchange. Then this just reminds me of some old system in China we have until like early 1990s, right? So the Russian system, you use money to buy something, but you also need some Russian coupons from the government to buy something. Flour, sugar. Yeah. So then, in that sense, introducing this environmental scorecard theoretically is equivalent to introducing this type of couponing system, right? And to what extent is effective, or to what extent is it efficient? So I think that is a very interesting theoretical question. And second, okay, so there is some authority issue. Okay, so yes, technologically and from the data perspective, so big companies, or nowadays even if the government has this company, so then have this data, you can do this type of things, you can introduce. So technologically, suppose there's no problem. But then the question is that, okay, so the public goods, so who should provide it? Okay, so for example, of course, Alibaba has the technology and data to do it, but whether it should be the big company to provide it, or whether it should be the government or regulator. So whether you have the authority to do this. Okay, so Alibaba gives me this environmental scorecard, says my score is very low, but why should I trust you? Okay, so maybe you have your own like incentive, right? So then that is just another issue, right? So who has the authority? Basically, who has the authority to issue the second money?
That's a good point. I've been thinking about it. There'll be many issues. You didn't even bring up private security and what can the private company learn from it and use it against in terms of my health. They know my health, but use that. My health is bad, and financial benefit. I don't want to give it credit because it's what bad. That health, that credit, and companies can just use that. Those kind of problems anytime start. I think the question is first, let's get started. I've already been publicizing this, so in Singapore, CBS is already working on something like this to create a carbon scorecard for the company. Right now, they're saying, look, we don't want to do tax reduction or anything, but what we want to do is provide a public good to our customers by saying this is your scorecard, and you improve it and you reduce it, and then over time we will do better, and maybe the government can come in and regulate it, and then when they regulate it, either we will provide it or they will take over and we will provide data for them to provide. Either way is fine, as long as we think of this finance as a public good or as a money-making good. Like where I said, is a private company that builds this scorecard and makes a lot of money. So maybe the government says, look, we are not in the business of providing the score, we are in the business of regulating it to this. So Alibaba still provides it, but the government makes sure that
I want to follow up a technical issue, but I think there lacks some theoretical foundation of it. So if you think about the difference between carbon emission and carbon reduction, so like in the 88 carbon account we already have on Alibaba, but if we talk to the government, and actually when we talk to the government, of how this amount of carbon reduction can enter into a carbon exchange. So then they will argue that, okay, so what you have is this consumer have this behavior, so potentially he saves some carbon emission by having a green behavior. But the comparison is a benchmark, that's the counterfactual, it's not happening. So how do you compare this amount with the actual carbon emission of a firm? Like, yeah, they reduce their carbon emission by what amount compared with last year or comparing with previously they produced the same product. So yeah.
I think that's an aggregation exercise. That to me is an aggregation exercise that you can do in the data. And especially you guys, you have so much data. You can see how consumers are shifting their spending away from certain products or producers. And then you can aggregate up and say, this is the amount of carbon reduction we can see. If, let's say in the extreme, consumers realize this is important and we are not going to eat beef anymore. Okay. And beef producers are suffering. Either you can tell them as a company, you need to transition, or you can figure out what is the reduction of the carbon footprint due to beef production, elimination of beef production, or clothes, or anything, or cars. But I think that I don't think it will be immediately obvious, or we will figure this out on day one. But over time, once we keep refining the product, once we keep refining the methodologies and aggregation and account calculation, we will get to that place. My guess is it will take around 10 years. Based on technology, we should be able to do it in 10 years. The fact is companies are already doing it. Because I've been making this presentation for many places, people are saying, okay, we will start working on it within the bank. So banks are saying, this is cool. Let's use it. Let's build it. And see how it goes. First, we'll at least give it to our consumer on trial basis and say, how do you like it? And if there is consumer response, then they can say we can roll it out for all consumer base of our bank.
Obviously, I think this area is really requires a cooperation from different sides, and especially also cooperation from authorities. I'm glad you are pushing over this way.
Yeah, well, I guess one question for me is what is the Singapore government's thinking about how this ultimately gets integrated and used? And then maybe in particular that benchmark problem is an interesting one because we're a platform that's creating new scenarios, new use cases for people. So you could say, for example, for food delivery, you could say we can make the packaging better. You could choose no utensils, but would you have even ordered food delivery to begin with, right? So that benchmark problem is interesting, and then that dovetails into the other question, which is there's probably to solve some of these issues, you probably need a more holistic view on this. So I'm curious what the Singapore government's view about what role they will ultimately play with this.
So let me try to think of the benchmark problem first and then go up to Singapore. See, I think one thing you guys can do, because you have such a big base, you can run experiments here across consumer groups, across time, across products and incentives, and see what people do. Use that to create the benchmarks. Okay, this is truly what would happen if we don't do that, and how much the carbon footprint will be. So that's one thing you can do. I'm doing some of that in India. I'm doing some of that in Singapore, working with small merchants where we are incentivizing them through financially or environmentally or for different products for eating to their consumer and see how they respond. Now to the bigger question of how is Singapore treating this. So I was actually on a public debate on this topic where the topic was broad, but the Deputy Prime Minister was also on the stage, and I was making this argument that, look, we need to do something like this big. Think big to work on it. Obviously, the concerns were raised by the Deputy Prime Minister and others, like, look, privacy, safety, regulation, and all that. But they thought this is a great idea. From an idea point of view, operationally, there will be issues. There's no doubt. I mean, you guys are also pointing out there'll be operational issues. I completely agree and see that. So hence, I don't see this up and running in a year or 6 months. But if we start it in 5 to 10 years, we will have a great product. My thing is, if you guys don't do it, somebody will do it for sure. Okay. You will miss the boat on this because companies will do this thing sooner or later, because it is something that is valuable from a society point of view, because we cannot continue to do the top-down approach to solve the carbon problem.
Okay, great. Any last questions? Speaking of missing the boat. Okay. Well, luckily, I think this is only the beginning of a dialogue, so there's no boat missing here. But you know, on behalf of all of us, we thank you so much for coming to visit and talking about this super important topic.